I am
I
Richard Miller.
remember it like it was
For 30
yesterday.
years, I inspected cargo at the
The
international
call came
checkpoint,
in
looking for
just
contraband
after
hidden beneath
midnight.
legitimate merchandise. Those
I
skills would
remember
serve
it
me
like it
well
was
when my own
yesterday,
family
the
tried to
day
smuggle me out of my
everything
life.
changed.
The
We
morning
were
was
just
ordinary.
boys then,
Coffee and my
full of-
favorite
it
mug
really
newspaper
comes
folded
down
on the oak
to
table, sunlight streaming through
support
windows that needed cleaning.
of the community
Just another Tuesday
and
at
the
Cedar
family.
Point Lake where I'd lived for the past 35 years. The house wasn't perfect. The grandfather clock my father left me needed repair. The deck groaned during storms, and the stairs creaked under even the lightest step. But it was mine. Every nail, every brushstroke, every repair carried Evelyn's and my hands, our sweat, our dreams. I was 77 now, alone for 3 years since Evelyn passed. The house sometimes felt too big, too quiet, but it was home. The only place where I could still hear her laugh echoing off the walls. The crunch of tires on gravel broke my morning reverie. Before I could reach the door, my son Andrew walked in, followed by his wife Melissa and my 2 grandchildren. 6 suitcases landed with heavy thuds in the middle of my living room, the kind of thuds that announce permanence, not a visit. Melissa didn't say hello, didn't ask how I was doing. She looked me straight in the eye and said, "You'll be moving downstairs. The upstairs is ours now." I smiled not because of what she said, but because I already knew something wasn't right about this sudden visit. If they'd known what I'd been preparing for, moments exactly like this one, they might never have stepped through my door with such confidence. Andrew was already heading upstairs like he owned the place, brushing past the grandfather clock. His steps had that purposeful weight of a man who'd made a decision without consulting the person it affected most. Melissa lingered just long enough to give the room a slow, appraising look, as if deciding what needed replacing before following him upstairs. Emma, my granddaughter, offered a small, uncertain smile, the kind you give someone you care about, but aren't sure how to approach when your parents are orchestrating something that feels wrong. She was 19, old enough to sense the tension, young enough to feel trapped between loyalty and conscience. Brandon didn't even look up from his phone, his thumbs moving across the screen in that perpetual dance of teenage disconnection. "Nice to see you too," I murmured, but nobody heard me. Upstairs drawers began opening and closing with the familiar rhythm of people unpacking for an extended stay. I took another sip of coffee, letting the bitter warmth ground me. In the old days, when Evelyn was alive, this house had never felt invaded. Even surprise visits were warm, welcome things filled with laughter and the smell of whatever she was cooking. We'd bought this place in the late 80s, a tired 2-story on the edge of Cedar Point Lake, its paint peeling its roof, groaning in storms. It took years of hard work, weekend after weekend, to make it into the home we loved. "Andrew," I called, keeping my tone even and measured. "What's going on?" His voice came down from above, carried on that note of patient explanation adults use when they've already decided what's best for you. "We told you, Dad. We're having the house worked on. Needed a place to stay for a few weeks." "I don't recall you telling me that." "You must have forgotten," he said, and underneath the casual tone ran a thread of impatience, as if my memory itself was now up for debate. Melissa appeared at the landing, her expression arranged into something that might pass for concern in better light. "We'll be out of your hair before you know it." "That's fine," I said carefully. "But the upstairs bedroom—" "Dad," Andrew cut in, appearing beside his wife. "The stairs aren't good for you. This way you've got the bathroom right there on the main floor. No risk of falling." I met his eyes and saw the rehearsed look of a salesman delivering a practice line. This wasn't a spontaneous decision made at my front door. This was planned, scripted, executed. "I've managed those stairs for 35 years. I said, my voice low and steady. Melissa smiled without warmth, that tight expression that passes for politeness when someone has decided you're an obstacle rather than a person. "And we'd like to keep it that way. Let us help." Some arguments cost more than silence. I'd learned that lesson decades ago, watching travelers decide which battles to fight at the checkpoint and which to let slide. You pick your moments. You choose your terrain. You don't waste ammunition on skirmishes you can win later with strategy instead of confrontation. I turned toward the small room off the living room, the one that had been a guest room for as long as I could remember. A single bed pushed against the wall, a small dresser with drawers that stuck in humid weather, no closet to speak of. More storage nook than bedroom, really. Now it was mine, at least according to the narrative being written around me without my input. By mid-afternoon, their presence was everywhere, colonizing my space with the subtle aggression of people who believe they're doing you a favor. Andrew's duffel bag slouched on the sofa where Evelyn used to fold laundry. Melissa had draped a scarf over the armchair where my wife used to read mystery novels and drink tea. My coffee table was now host to an arrangement of scented candles that smelled faintly of lavender and chemicals, nothing like the natural smells of wood and lake water that usually filled my home. I caught Melissa in the kitchen peering into my refrigerator with the expression of someone conducting an inspection. "This milk expired yesterday," she said, holding it up like evidence in a trial I hadn't known I was standing for. "I drink it with my coffee," I replied, my voice neutral. "Andrew, pick up almond milk later," she called toward the living room, dismissing my preference as if it were a medical condition that needed correction. "I've lived this long without almond milk," I muttered. "Well, we'll just make a few small changes," she said, with that same thin smile, the kind that says the speaker believes they're being reasonable while slowly dismantling your autonomy, one decision at a time. I stepped out onto the deck to breathe air that didn't feel like it was being rationed. The lake rippled under a pale autumn sunlight, dancing across the surface in patterns that never repeated. Two geese drifted near the reeds, their necks curved in that graceful question mark shape that always made Evelyn pause whatever she was doing to watch. Out here, the air was clean, untouched by the sense of rearrangement creeping through my house. Helping family wasn't the problem. Lord knows I'd done my share for Andrew over the years. College tuition when scholarships didn't quite cover it. His first down payment when he and Melissa bought their starter home. I even covered his mortgage payments when the market collapsed and his real estate commissions dried up for 6 months. I never kept score, never threw it back in his face during arguments, never treated generosity like a loan with interest. But this was different. This wasn't asking. This was assuming. And assumptions I'd learned long ago are the first stones in a wall built around you, trapping you inside a narrative someone else is writing. When I came back inside, Emma was in the kitchen alone, pouring herself a glass of water with the careful movements of someone trying not to draw attention. "Hi, Grandpa," she said softly. "Hi, sweetheart. You doing okay?" She shrugged, a gesture that contained volumes of things she couldn't say with her parents in the house. "Yeah, college is a lot." "You'll manage," I said, recognizing in her that same quiet strength her grandmother had possessed. "How long are you all staying?" She hesitated, and in that pause I heard everything she was trying not to tell me. "They said a month, but I don't know." "Emma, come help me." Melissa's voice carried in from the living room, sharp with the authority of someone used to immediate obedience. She gave me an apologetic look that said more than any explanation could and went to join her mother. I stood alone in my kitchen, surrounded by the small changes already taking root. New dish soap by the sink. A different brand of coffee filters on the counter. My favorite mug pushed to the back of the cabinet behind 4 tall white ones that matched each other, and nothing else in my house. That night in the cramped guest room that smelled faintly of storage and disuse, I could hear voices through the floorboards. Not the words, just the low, steady hum of conversation, planning, deciding. People don't bring 6 suitcases for a few weeks, I thought, staring at the ceiling. And they don't claim the master bedroom for safety reasons when the person they're supposedly protecting has been climbing those stairs without incident for 35 years. I reached into my pocket and felt the edge of an envelope I'd noticed earlier mixed in with the mail on the entry table. Forwarding notices from the post office, a glossy postcard for a senior living showcase at a hotel off Route 8, and a coupon for stair lifts, all rubber banded together with my name on top in handwriting that wasn't mine. Someone had filled out forms for me, and my life had sprouted brochures I hadn't asked for. I lay there in the almost dark, listening to my house settle around strangers who shared my blood, but had forgotten to ask my permission. And I began to count the way I used to count shipping containers at the port, methodically cataloging what was mine, what was theirs, and what they thought they could take without me noticing. The game had started. They just didn't know I'd been trained to spot smugglers. The next morning arrived with the sound of furniture being moved. I woke to the scrape of chair legs on hardwood floors and the low murmur of Melissa's voice issuing instructions to someone who wasn't me. By the time I emerged from the guest room, the living room had been rearranged. The sofa now faced the lake at a different angle, as if someone had decided the view needed improvement after 35 years of being just fine. Melissa stood in the hallway with a basket of new candles, replacing the simple, unscented ones Evelyn had preferred, with elaborate vanilla and cinnamon things that announced their presence from 3 rooms away. When she noticed me watching, she smiled that smile again, the one that said she was doing me a favor I hadn't asked for. Just freshening things up a bit, she said brightly. The house needs some life in it. The house had plenty of life in it before you arrived, I wanted to say. But I just nodded and moved toward the kitchen where coffee was calling my name like an old friend who still remembered who I was. On the mantel above the fireplace, I noticed immediately what was missing. The framed photo of Evelyn and me on the day we finally fixed the porch railing, both of us sweaty and ridiculous and proud, had been moved. It now sat on the piano bench, tucked behind a stack of glossy magazines about home design and expensive furniture. In its place on the mantel was a white ceramic sculpture that looked like someone had started to make a knot and given up halfway through. "Less clutter," Melissa said, when she caught me staring at the empty space where my wife's face used to greet me every morning, "creates a cleaner aesthetic." Aesthetic. I repeated the word in my mind like it was a foreign language I was being forced to learn. I walked over and moved the photo back to the mantel where the morning light hit Evelyn's smile just right. I didn't make a speech about it. You don't spend 40 years reading people for a living without learning when a speech puts you in a hole deeper than silence. At 10 o'clock, a white van pulled into my driveway. A young man in his 20s stepped out carrying a clipboard and a tape measure, wearing khakis that had been ironed with the kind of precision that said his mother still did his laundry. He knocked like people do when they're expected. 3 quick raps that said this wasn't a cold call. I opened the door before he finished the 3rd knock. "Here for the measurements," he said, flipping through papers on his clipboard with the casual efficiency of someone who did this 20 times a week. "Measurements for what?" I asked, my voice level, though I already had a pretty good idea what was happening. He checked his paperwork again. "Kitchen. Mrs. Stephanie Wilson booked a free estimate. Cabinet refacing." I looked past him toward the kitchen that had learned the shape of my hands and Evelyn's over decades. The cabinet doors had nicks and scratches that told stories. The turkey pan slipped and nearly hit the floor. The night we hosted Evelyn's sister and discovered you could run out of clean plates if you weren't careful. The time Emma was 3 and colored on a lower panel with a green crayon, and Evelyn said to leave it because it was better than any paint job we could buy. "Not today," I said quietly but firmly. The young man looked confused, then relieved that he might get back to his truck early, then concerned about his quota. "Can I leave a brochure?" "You can leave," I said in that polite way people from the Midwest are rude with a smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes, but keeps the word civil. Andrew appeared from wherever he'd been moving quickly across the living room. He clapped the contractor on the back with false familiarity. "Sorry, buddy. My dad's old school. We'll call you." The man took this as both instruction and permission to escape, retreating to his van, which had a dangling air freshener shaped like a pine tree that knocked against the windshield in the breeze. When Andrew closed the door, he leaned his forehead against it for a breath like he was carrying the world's most noble headache. Then he turned to face me with that expression I'd seen 1,000 times growing up, the one that said he'd already decided I was being difficult, and he was being patient. "Dad," he said, his voice calibrated for maximum reasonableness. "We talked about updating small things, smart things. You want this place to last, don't you?" "It has," I said simply, "longer than most marriages." "Very funny," he said, which told me he didn't think it was funny at all. "Melissa got us a free estimate." "Free? It always starts free," I said. "So does advice." He put his hands in his pockets and looked down at the entryway tile, the pattern Evelyn had insisted on, even though I'd thought it was too modern at the time. She'd been right, of course. She usually was. "You know, Dad," he said, lifting his head with eyes that had gone bright with the sheen some men wear right before a deal goes through. "You're not the only one who loves this house." "I've noticed," I said. He opened his mouth closed. It seemed to select a different answer, the way you'd select a shirt from a closet full of options. "We should make sure it's positioned for—" He stopped himself. "Positioned for what?" I asked. "For you," he said carefully. "For your needs." "I need my bed where my bed has been," I said, my voice still quiet, but with a steel edge creeping in. "I need my photo where my photo belongs. I need to drink coffee without being managed like a child who can't be trusted with dairy products." "It's just structure," he said, reaching for that word like it was a life preserver. "Structure keeps everyone sane." "Save it for people who ask for your structure," I said. In the late afternoon, I found Melissa in the hallway with a roll of blue painter's tape, sticking small pieces on the walls next to framed pictures. Family photos, vacation snapshots, the visual history of a life lived in this house. "What are you doing?" I asked, though the answer was unfolding right in front of me. She didn't look up, continuing to mark photos with the systematic approach of someone executing a plan. Marking things to reorganize. We need visual consistency. Visual consistency, I repeated, tasting the corporate speak on my tongue like medicine. Is that like family? She pressed a bit of tape next to a photo of Evelyn at the lake in a straw hat, kneeling to show Emma how to hold a frog without hurting it. One of my favorite pictures because you could see 3 generations of kindness in a single frame. "We'll keep the nice ones," Melissa said, as if she were the curator of my memories. "They're all nice," I said. "This one's blurry," she said, tugging at the frame like it was already decided. I held up my hand without thinking, without planning it, just something in my chest stepping forward before my brain caught up. "Leave them." She looked at me like I'd grabbed her wrist, startled by the sudden boundary. "We're not throwing them away, we're just curating." "Curating is what museums do to other people's lives," I said, my voice low and steady. "These are mine." A shadow cut across the hallway light and Andrew appeared at the top of the stairs, moving with the practiced urgency of a mediator who'd heard just enough. "Everything okay?" he asked, though the question was really a warning wrapped in civility. "Your father has feelings about the hallway," Melissa said, her tone shifting into something that invited him to take her side. Andrew's smile was the one he used on clients who were about to walk away from a deal. "Let's table the gallery wall," he said, as if we were in one of his conference rooms, and not standing in my hallway discussing whether I had the right to keep my own photographs where I wanted them. He kissed the top of Melissa's head, and she put the tape in her pocket, taking longer than necessary to show me this wasn't surrender so much as strategic retreat. I ate dinner early that evening just to have something that didn't require negotiation. Scrambled eggs and toast that came out too dark because I forgot to watch it. Evelyn had always popped the slices up at the first click, her timing perfect from decades of practice. I sat alone at the small table in what used to be my kitchen and was rapidly becoming their staging area, and I thought about how quickly a person can become a guest in their own home. After dinner, I stepped out onto the deck where the air still remembered who I was. The lake was turning that particular shade of gray-blue it gets in early evening, peaceful and indifferent to human drama. I stood there with my hands on the railing Evelyn and I had rebuilt together, and I made a decision. They thought this was their house now because I'd been quiet, because I'd moved downstairs without fighting, because I'd let the contractor leave without making a scene. They'd mistaken my silence for surrender, my patience for weakness. But I'd spent 30 years at the customs checkpoint learning to spot contraband hidden in false bottoms and behind legitimate cargo. I knew how to watch, how to wait, how to document everything while looking like I wasn't paying attention at all. Tomorrow I'd start making phone calls, quiet ones, to people who understood that paper and signatures and property rights weren't suggestions. They were law. And the law, I was about to remind my son and his wife, was the one thing in this situation that was actually on my side. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a number I hadn't called in 3 years. Calvin at the marina. The text I sent was simple. "Need to talk. You still keep office hours." His response came back in under a minute. "For you always." Tomorrow morning I typed back, "See you at 9. Inside the house I could hear Melissa laughing at something on television, the sound of someone comfortable in a space they believed they'd already won. I smiled into the darkness, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes, but holds all the planning that's about to unfold. Let them rearrange furniture. Let them order contractors and mark photos and replace my milk with their almond alternatives. Every move they made without asking was another piece of evidence I was quietly, methodically collecting. The game had started. They just didn't know yet that I'd been playing it longer than they'd been alive. That evening we gathered in the living room after dinner, a forced togetherness that felt like a performance none of us had rehearsed properly. Andrew sat in my recliner, the one that had molded itself to my body over 2 decades, scrolling through his phone with the distracted attention of someone waiting for the right moment to say something important. Melissa emerged from the kitchen with a bottle of wine she'd brought from somewhere already uncorked, already decided. She poured herself a generous glass and settled onto the sofa with the satisfied air of someone reviewing a property they were about to close on. "You know," Andrew said, looking up from his phone with that casual tone people use when they're about to say something they've been planning all day, "if we moved the sofa to face the lake more directly, it would really open up the space. Good for resale value." The words hung in the air like smoke that wouldn't dissipate. Resale, I said quietly, my coffee cup suspended halfway to my mouth. Melissa's head snapped toward Andrew with a look that could cut glass. Ignore him, she said quickly, forcing a laugh that sounded like breaking pottery. He's always talking shop real estate, Brain. You know how it is. But I did know how it was. I knew exactly how it was. That single word, resale, had opened a window I wasn't supposed to see through yet. Andrew wasn't talking about improvements for my benefit. He was talking about staging a property for market. He was talking about preparing my house for sale like I was already gone, already moved, already somewhere else entirely. I set my cup down carefully, stood without saying another word, and walked out onto the deck. Behind me, I heard Andrew's voice rise, slightly frustrated. What I was just saying. And then Melissa's sharp whisper cutting him off with words I couldn't quite make out but understood perfectly. That was the sound of someone being told they'd revealed too much too soon. The evening air was cooler now, carrying that edge of autumn that said winter was already practicing its lines off stage. I gripped the deck railing and stared out at the lake, watching the last light fade from the water, turning everything to shadow and suggestion. I'd been a fool. Not for missing the signs because I'd seen them all, but for hoping somewhere in the back of my mind that I was wrong, that my son wouldn't actually do this. That the boy I'd raised, the one I'd taught to fish off this very dock, to change a tire, to shake hands firmly, and look people in the eye, wouldn't plan to take my home out from under me, like I was a problem that needed solving rather than a person who deserved respect. The screen door creaked behind me with that particular sound it makes, the one I'd been meaning to oil for 3 years and never got around to, because Evelyn used to say it was like a doorbell that warned you when someone was coming. Grandpa. I turned to find Emma standing in the doorway, backlit by the living room lamp, her arms wrapped around herself against the cold. She looked uncertain, caught between the world of her parents inside and the world of her grandfather outside, trying to figure out which one told the truth. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Always," I said, gesturing to the chair beside me. She came and sat, but not like someone relaxing. She sat like someone preparing to confess something that had been eating at her, perched on the edge of the seat, ready to flee if necessary. "I need to tell you something," she said, staring at her hands. "I wasn't snooping, I swear I wasn't. But I heard them talking last night after you went to bed." I waited, giving her the space to find her words. One thing working customs taught me was that people tell you more when you let silence do the asking. Mom was excited. Emma continued, speaking faster now that she'd started, like she needed to get it all out before she lost her nerve. "She talks faster when she's excited. She said they'd put down a deposit for a place." "What kind of place?" I asked, though cold certainty was already settling in my chest like ice. "A senior community," she said, wincing at the words. "That's what they called it. But then Mom said the real term, the one on the contract, was assisted living. She said it would solve everything." Emma made little air quotes around "solve everything" with her fingers, and the gesture would have been funny if my entire world wasn't tilting sideways. "They were talking like it was already decided," she went on, "like you'd already agreed." "But Grandpa, you didn't agree, did you?" "No," I said, my voice steady despite the fury building behind my ribs. "I did not agree." She let out a breath she'd been holding. "I asked Dad about it this morning in the car. I kept it casual. I said, 'Are we moving? Grandpa seems fine.' And he said it was for your safety, that you need routine and supervision, that they can't be here forever." She paused, swallowing hard before continuing. "And then he said, besides, we'll need the rooms when Nana and Papa Wilson move in." There it was, the full picture painted in brushstrokes I should have seen coming from the moment those 6 suitcases hit my living room floor. This wasn't about a few weeks while their house was being worked on. This wasn't about helping me with the stairs or keeping me safe from imaginary hazards. This was about moving me out and moving Melissa's parents in. About claiming my house, my home, the place Evelyn and I had built together, nail by nail and memory by memory, and turning it into something else entirely. Something that had nothing to do with me, except as an inconvenient obstacle that needed removing. "They're selling their condo in Fairview," Emma added quietly. "Mom wants them here by Thanksgiving. She said the timing would be perfect." Perfect. The word sat in my mouth like poison. "Grandpa, I told Dad it wasn't fair, that you're you, that you know how to take care of yourself. He said I didn't understand adult decisions yet." She rolled her eyes and the gesture was so much like her grandmother that my chest ached. And then he said not to tell you because you'd get anxious and spiral. I hate that word spiral, like you're not a whole person who deserves to know what people are planning to do with your life. I reached over and squeezed her hand. Thank you for telling me. That took courage. I'm scared I made it worse, she said. You didn't, I assured her. You gave me something I need. Information, the truth. Can't fight what you can't see. How much do you know? I asked. Besides the deposit. She took a breath, organizing her thoughts. They toured a bunch of places last week, like 5 or 6 different facilities. They settled on one called Oakwood Senior Living. It's in Maple Hollow near the highway. Mom likes it because it's clean and close to good hospitals. Dad likes it because they have a shuttle and social programming, so he doesn't feel guilty about not visiting. She said the last part, quickly, a shame for him. Mom already made an appointment with a clinic, Emma continued. For you, Tuesday at 10:15. She put it on a calendar she made for you, like that makes it official. The clinic specializes in elder care pathways. Again, with the air quotes this time around, elder care pathways. And I could hear the contempt in her voice for the bureaucratic language that tried to make kidnapping sound like compassion. I looked it up between classes, she said, the place Oakwood. People leave reviews online. Some are good, some not. People said the staff turnover is high, that if you don't have someone checking on you regularly, you can kind of get lost in the system. Each word she spoke was another nail, another board, another wall of the trap closing in around me. But instead of panic, I felt something else settling into place. Clarity. The cold, calculating clarity I used to feel at the checkpoint when I'd spot something wrong in a shipping manifest, some detail that didn't add up, and I'd know without seeing inside the container that something illegal was being smuggled. They'd made a mistake. They'd moved too fast, planned too much, gotten too confident. And in their confidence, they'd left evidence everywhere. The forwarding notice, the appointment, I never scheduled the calendar, I never asked for the deposit in Andrew's name. All of it documented, traceable, provable. Grandpa? Emma's voice pulled me back. Are you okay? I looked at her, this young woman who'd chosen conscience over comfort, truth over family loyalty, and I felt a surge of pride that pushed back against the betrayal churning in my gut. I'm better than okay, I said. I'm informed. And information, sweetheart, is the most powerful weapon there is. What are you going to do? She asked. What I've been trained to do, I said. Watch, document, wait for the right moment, and then move pieces into place they won't see coming until it's too late to stop. She nodded, and in her eyes I saw belief. She thought I could fix this. And standing there in the cold with the lake whispering behind us, and my house full of people who'd forgotten I was still the one whose name was on the deed, I realized she was right. I could fix this. I would fix this. But not with anger or confrontation or loud declarations that would give them time to adjust their strategy. No, I'd do it the way I'd always done things that mattered. Quietly, methodically, with paper and signatures and the law on my side. Emma, I said, if you hear anything else, any dates or times or names, you tell me. Don't trust your memory. Write it down. And don't put it in your phone. Paper can't be subpoenaed from a cloud. She almost smiled. You really were a customs inspector. Once you learn to count boxes and check manifests, I said, you never stop seeing the world as cargo that needs inspecting. We went back inside together. Andrew and Melissa were in the kitchen, their voices low and urgent, the conversation of people who knew they'd made an error and were trying to figure out how much damage it had done. When they saw us come in, they went silent, rearranging their faces into expressions of casual normality. Everything okay out there? Melissa asked, her tone too bright, too interested. Fine, I said, just looking at the stars with my granddaughter teaching her the constellations. It was a lie, but it was the kind of lie that wouldn't raise suspicion. Wholesome, grandfatherly, exactly what they expected from the old man they were planning to warehouse in a facility with a shuttle and social programming. I excused myself to the guest room and closed the door. Then I pulled out my phone and started making a list in the Notes app, something I could delete later, but needed to see written out now to make it real. Call Calvin tomorrow. Verify deed status. Contact title office. Check bank account beneficiaries. Find property attorney. Get medical evaluation scheduled on my terms, not theirs. Document everything they do without permission. Photograph the forwarding notice. Save the calendar they made. Record dates and times. I stared at the list, then added one more line at the bottom. Find out who owns the house they're planning to put me in. Because if there's one thing I learned in 30 years of catching smugglers, it's that following the money always tells you who's really in charge. I deleted the list, memorized it, and lay back on the narrow bed that wasn't mine. Above me, I could hear footsteps. Melissa's quick, efficient pace, Andrew's heavier tread, the sound of people settling into a home they decided was theirs. Let them settle. Let them plan. Let them make appointments and tour facilities and discuss resale value over wine they brought to my house. Because tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, I was going to start building a case they wouldn't see coming. And by the time they realized what I was doing, it would be too late for them to stop it. The old customs inspector wasn't retired. He was just waiting for the right shipment to inspect. And it had just arrived at his door. The next morning I woke before dawn, that automatic early rising that comes from decades of starting work shifts at 5:00 a.m. The house was still quiet, everyone else asleep in beds they'd claimed without asking. I moved through the darkness like a man who knew every creak in the floorboards, every place to step to avoid announcing himself. I climbed the stairs to the second floor, each step deliberate and silent. At the top, I paused outside what used to be my bedroom. Through the door, I could hear Andrew's heavy breathing, the kind of deep sleep that comes from believing everything is going according to plan. Melissa made small sounds in her sleep, restless even in unconsciousness. I moved past their door to the spare room where we'd kept overflow storage, the place where Evelyn had tucked away the things that mattered most. I opened the closet as quietly as humanly possible and reached for the second drawer of the built-in dresser, the one that stuck slightly in humid weather. Inside, beneath stacks of old greeting cards and a shoebox of vacation photos, sat a flat manila envelope with a crease across the middle. I pulled it out carefully, feeling the weight of what was inside. These were the documents I'd been smart enough to keep organized when Evelyn got sick, when lawyers and doctors and insurance companies had all wanted their piece of paperwork signed and filed and notarized. I carried the envelope downstairs and spread its contents on the kitchen table under the dim light of the stove hood. The deed to the house recorded at the county office in 1988, when we'd finally paid off the mortgage after 15 years of scrimping and saving. Owner Richard Miller. No lien, no life estate, no co-owners, just my name clean and clear, stamped and official. The will I'd updated after Evelyn passed, leaving everything to Andrew because he was my only child. And that's what you do. The life insurance policy that had paid out smaller than anyone promised, but enough to cover funeral costs and 6 months of breathing room. And the marriage certificate, the only paper I owned that could still make me hear Evelyn's laugh just by reading our names side by side. I pulled out my phone and photographed each document, making sure the text was clear and legible. Then I emailed them to myself at an address I kept for important things, the one that wasn't connected to any app that Melissa might convince me to share access to for family calendar coordination, or photo sharing, or whatever excuse she'd invent. The deed was the important one. That single piece of paper proved beyond any argument that this house was mine, not ours, not the family's mine. And whatever plans Andrew and Melissa had made, they'd made them without the one signature that actually mattered under law. I heard a sound upstairs, the creak of someone getting up to use the bathroom. I quickly gathered the documents back into the envelope and moved to the living room. The Christmas decorations were stored in a large plastic bin in the coat closet shoved to the back behind winter jackets and boots. I opened the bin, moved aside the garland and ornaments Evelyn had collected over 40 years, and found the false bottom I'd installed myself to store the few valuable things we owned. My grandfather's war medals, Evelyn's grandmother's jewelry, and now one copy of my critical documents. The second copy went into the kitchen, tucked inside a spiral-bound community cookbook from 1986 that Evelyn had loved, the kind with recipes submitted by church members and local businesses. If anyone went rifling through my things, they wouldn't waste time reading recipes for casseroles and Jell-O salads. Sometimes the best hiding place is something so boring, no one bothers to look. By the time Melissa came downstairs at 7:30, I was sitting at the table with fresh coffee and the newspaper, looking like a man who'd done nothing more suspicious than wake early out of habit. "Morning, Richard," she said, her voice carrying that forced brightness people use when they're trying to establish normalcy after tension. She moved to the cabinet, and I watched her rearrange my pills, lining them up by size instead of by the schedule I'd been following for 10 years. I organized these for you, she said, not asking if I wanted them organized, just announcing it as an accomplished fact. Much easier to keep track this way. I've been keeping track just fine, I said mildly. I'm sure you have, she said in that tone that meant she was sure I hadn't. Andrew came down 20 minutes later, already on his phone, talking to someone about a property showing and a client who wanted to see 3 houses in 2 hours. Real estate never sleeps, apparently. He poured coffee without looking up from his screen, grunted something that might have been good morning, and disappeared into what used to be my home office to take a call. At 8:45, I grabbed my jacket from the hook by the door. Melissa appeared from wherever she'd been, watching me with the wary eyes of someone who doesn't want their project wandering off. "Where are you headed?" she asked, her voice casual, but her posture anything but. "Marina," I said. "Meeting Calvin for coffee. Old friend." "Do you want me to drive you?" "Been driving myself to the marina for 30 years, I said. "Think I can manage." "Well, be careful on those roads," she said. "They're tricky this time of year." What she meant was that I was old and shouldn't be trusted with a vehicle, but I just nodded and headed out the door before she could invent a reason to follow me. The marina sat on the north side of Cedar Point Lake, a collection of weathered buildings that looked like they might blow over in a strong wind, but had somehow withstood 50 years of storms. Calvin's office was above the boat rental shop, accessible by an exterior staircase that groaned under even the lightest step. I found him at his desk, surrounded by the organized chaos of a man who knew where everything was, despite appearances to the contrary. 73, with a sailor's weathered face and hands that had seen too much sun and not enough sunscreen. Calvin Reed had run the marina since before most of the houses on the lake were built. He knew everyone and everything that happened on these shores. "Richard," he said, standing to shake my hand with a grip that hadn't weakened with age. "Been a while." "Too long," I agreed. "Thanks for seeing me." "Always got time for you." He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Coffee's fresh for once. What's on your mind?" I sat, feeling the weight of what I was about to say. "Need your help, Cal. Andrew and Melissa moved in 2 days ago. 6 suitcases. Claimed the upstairs. Moved me to the guest room." Calvin's eyes narrowed slightly, the look of a man who could see where this story was going before I finished telling it. "Unexpected visit." "Very. And it's not a visit. They're planning to put me in assisted living. Already made a deposit at Oakwood." He let out a low whistle. "Oakwood. That place is a warehouse with wallpaper. You know it. Sister-in-law's brother ended up there. Went in walking, came out in a box 6 months later." He leaned forward, his elbows on the desk. "You're sharper than half the people I do business with, Richard. Why would they think you need assisted living?" "Because they want my house," I said simply. "Melissa's parents are selling their condo. They need somewhere to go by Thanksgiving." Calvin's face darkened. "So they're moving you out to move them in?" "That's the plan." "Whose name is on the deed?" "Mine. Only mine." He nodded slowly, thinking. "And I'm guessing you didn't sign anything giving them permission to do this?" "Haven't signed a thing." A slow smile spread across Calvin's face, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes, but holds a calculated satisfaction. "Then they can't do a damn thing without your signature. Not legally." "That's what I figured. But they're moving fast, Cal. Making appointments, talking to contractors. Andrew let slip the word resale last night." Calvin drummed his fingers on the desk, his mind working through the problem. "You need a lawyer, a good one who specializes in elder law and property rights. Know anyone?" "As a matter of fact, I do." He pulled out his phone, scrolled through his contacts, and made a call. "Sarah, Calvin Reed. Got a situation here at the marina. Friend of mine needs some legal advice. Elder law, property rights. Can you see him today?" "Great. We'll be there at 11. He hung up and looked at me. "Sarah Donovan, best damn property attorney in the county. Helped me stop the resort development they tried to put in on the East Shore 3 years back. If anyone can help you protect your house, it's her." "Thanks, Cal." "That's not all," he said, leaning forward again. "You need to document everything. Every conversation, every change they make to the house, every appointment they try to schedule for you without asking. Date, time, who said what. Keep it in a notebook they can't access. And take pictures." "Already started," I said. "And you need a medical evaluation," he continued. "From your doctor, not theirs. Something that states unequivocally that you're competent to make your own decisions. Get it notarized if you can. I'll call Dr. Matthews this afternoon. Calvin sat back in his chair studying me with the shrewd eyes of a man who'd spent his life assessing people's character. There's something else, isn't there? Something you're not telling me. I hesitated, then decided Cal deserved the full truth. I've been thinking about selling the house anyway. His eyebrows shot up in surprise. Really? After all these years? It's too big for just me, I admitted. Been thinking about it since Evelyn passed. But on my terms, Cal, not theirs. And certainly not with me being shuffled off to Oakwood while they profit. He nodded slowly. So the game isn't just about stopping them. It's about beating them to the punch. Exactly. I want to sell it before they can force me out. Use the money to get a small place on my terms. Something manageable, but still mine. A slow grin spread across Calvin's face. Richard Miller, you sly old fox. You're not just playing defense. You're on offense. Always was a better striker than goalkeeper, I said, allowing myself a small smile. My nephew Owen is a real estate broker. Calvin said, his mind already racing ahead. Specializes in discreet sales, off-market deals. If you want to move fast and keep it quiet, he's your man. And can he be trusted? With my life, Calvin said without hesitation. His mother, my sister, was in a similar situation a few years back. Daughter tried to take her house after her husband died. Owen helped her sell it to a private buyer and get a nice little condo by the lake. He takes this stuff personally. Set up a meeting, I said. Soon. How about tomorrow 9 a.m. here at the marina? Perfect. We spent the next hour going over my options, planning my strategy, identifying potential pitfalls. By the time we headed to Sarah Donovan's office, I felt something I hadn't felt in days: control. Not complete control, but enough to start turning the tide. Sarah's office was in a converted Victorian house in the center of town, the kind of place that looked warm and inviting rather than coldly professional. She met us in a conference room with large windows overlooking a garden that was preparing for winter, the last stubborn flowers hanging on against the coming frost. Mr. Miller, she said, shaking my hand firmly, Calvin tells me you're facing some unwanted interference with your property rights. That's putting it mildly, I said. I laid out the whole story for her. Andrew and Melissa's sudden arrival, the slow colonization of my house, Emma's revelations about the assisted living facility. Sarah listened without interrupting, taking careful notes, her expression giving away nothing but professional interest. When I finished, she set down her pen and looked me straight in the eye. Let me be clear, Mr. Miller. What they're attempting is not just morally questionable, it's legally dubious at best. They have no authority to place you in any facility without your consent if you're of sound mind. They have no right to sell or modify your property without your signature. And if they've made a deposit at Oakwood in your name without your permission, that could constitute fraud. So what do? I asked. First, we document your mental competency. I want a letter from your primary care physician stating unequivocally that you're capable of making your own financial and healthcare decisions. Second, we put together a cease and desist letter, making it clear you have not authorized any changes to your living situation or property. I don't want to antagonize them yet, I said. I'd rather let them think they're succeeding until I've made my own arrangements. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. A stealth approach. Understandable. In that case, we'll prepare the documents but hold them in reserve. Meanwhile, I suggest you secure your financial accounts. Make sure Andrew doesn't have access to anything he could use to claim he's acting on your behalf. Already on it. What about the house itself? The deed is in your name only, so they can't sell it without you. But they could potentially claim that you're unable to care for yourself and petition for guardianship. That's where the medical evaluation becomes critical. And if I decide to sell it myself, I asked. She smiled slightly. That would be entirely your prerogative as the sole owner. They might challenge the sale after the fact if they believe you weren't competent, but with proper medical documentation and a fair market value transaction, such a challenge would likely fail. How fast could a sale happen? With a motivated buyer who can pay cash, as little as 2 weeks. Conventional financing would take longer, typically 30 to 45 days. 2 weeks. I repeated the timeline, settling in my mind like a plan coming into focus. Calvin mentioned his nephew Owen might be able to help with a discreet sale, Sarah said. I've worked with Owen on several transactions. He's good, very good, and he understands delicate family situations. We're meeting tomorrow, I confirmed. Excellent. In the meantime, I'll start preparing the paperwork we might need. And Mr. Miller, document everything. Take photos of any changes they make to the house. Save any communications about appointments or facilities. Record dates and times of relevant conversations. Already started a log, I said. Perfect. One more thing, she added, her expression serious. Don't sign anything they put in front of you. Not a medical form, not a power of attorney, not a property document. Nothing. If they pressure you, tell them you need your reading glasses or you want to think about it overnight. Buy time, but don't sign. I won't, I promised. As we left Sarah's office, Calvin clapped me on the shoulder. Feel better? Much, I admitted. It's good to know I'm not crazy, that the law is on my side. You're not just on the right side of the law, Richard. You're on the right side of decency. What they're doing isn't just illegal, it's wrong. Remember that when the guilt trips start. We parted ways outside the office, Calvin heading back to the marina, me to my house that was feeling less like home by the hour. I drove slowly, thinking about what lay ahead, the confrontation that would eventually come, the hurt and anger that would follow, the family relationships that might never recover. But I also thought about what was at stake, my dignity, my autonomy, my right to make my own decisions about my own life. And I knew deep in my bones that this was a fight worth having, not just for me, but for every aging parent who'd ever been treated like a problem to solve rather than a person to respect. When I pulled into my driveway, Melissa's car was gone. Andrew's too. Just Emma's small Honda parked at the edge of the gravel. I found her in the kitchen making a sandwich, the house quiet around her. Where is everyone? I asked. Mom and Dad went to look at more retirement places. She said, her voice low as if someone might be listening. Brandon's at soccer practice. I'm supposed to be at the library, but I wanted to check on you. I'm okay, I assured her. Better than okay. I met with a lawyer today. Her eyes widened. What did they say? That what they're doing isn't just wrong, it's potentially illegal, and that I have options. Relief washed over her face. So they can't just put you in that place. Not without my consent, and they don't have it. She set down her sandwich, suddenly serious. They're meeting with the Oakwood administrator tomorrow at 2. Mom's been going through your clothes, deciding what you'll need there, and Dad called a real estate photographer to come next Monday. The timeline was accelerating. They were moving faster than I'd anticipated. Emma, I need you to do something for me, I said carefully. Don't confront them. Don't let them know what I'm doing. Just keep your eyes and ears open and tell me what you learn. I will, she promised. But Grandpa, what are you going to do? I'm going to sell the house, I said simply. She blinked in surprise. Sell it? Before they can force me out, on my terms, not theirs, and use the money to get a small place that's really mine. Understanding dawned in her eyes. You're going to beat them at their own game. That's the plan. She smiled, then a genuine smile that reminded me so much of Evelyn, it made my chest ache. Grandma would be proud. She always said you were smarter than you looked. Your grandmother, I said with a small laugh, was usually right about most things. The morning I was scheduled to meet Owen Morrison, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. The plan forming in my mind wasn't about revenge, it was about correction, setting things right, reclaiming what was mine while there was still time to do it. I found Emma in the kitchen making coffee, her movements quiet and efficient, like someone trying not to wake the household. She looked up when I entered, her face brightening with relief. You're up early, she whispered. Mom and Dad are still asleep. Meeting at the marina, I said softly. Would you mind driving me? My car makes too much noise pulling out. She nodded immediately. Let me grab my keys. 10 minutes later, we were driving down the quiet morning streets, the mist rising off Cedar Point Lake like ghosts drifting across the surface. Emma kept glancing at me as if checking to see if I was still solid, still present. Dad's been talking to the Oakwood administrator, she said finally. They're pushing the timeline up. Mom wants you moved in by this weekend. This weekend? 3 days. They were moving faster than I'd anticipated. There's a welcome brunch on Saturday. Mom already RSVP'd for you. I nodded, absorbing this new information. That gives us 3 days to outmaneuver them. Us. You're already involved, sweetheart. The moment you chose to tell me the truth. She gripped the steering wheel tighter. I don't want to betray my parents, but what they're doing isn't right. Sometimes the most loyal thing you can do is stop someone from making a terrible mistake, I said, even if they hate you for it in the moment. The marina came into view, the morning sun glinting off boats bobbing gently at their moorings. Calvin was waiting outside his office talking with a younger man who had to be his nephew. They both turned as Emma parked. "Richard," Calvin called, waving us over. "Right on time. This is Owen. Owen Richard Miller. And this must be—" "Emma," I supplied. "My granddaughter and co-conspirator." Owen Morrison was in his mid-30s, dressed in business casual that managed to look both professional and approachable. He had Calvin's shrewd eyes but a more polished demeanor, like his uncle's rough edges had been sanded down by business school. "Mr. Miller," he said, shaking my hand firmly, "Uncle Cal filled me in on your situation. Let's go up to the office where we can talk privately." Once we were seated in Calvin's cluttered office, Owen got straight to the point. "You want to sell your house before your son can move you into assisted living. How fast do you need to move?" 3 days if possible, Saturday at the latest." Owen raised his eyebrows. "That's aggressive but not impossible with the right buyer and proper motivation. The house is solely in your name. Yes, deeds clean, no liens, no co-owners. And you've had a capacity evaluation to verify you're competent to make this decision. Meeting with my doctor at 11. Attorney Sarah Donovan recommended documenting my capacity before proceeding." Owen nodded approvingly. "Smart. We'll need that letter before closing to protect the sale from challenges." He pulled out a tablet and began typing. "Tell me about the property. Square footage, condition, any major updates or issues I should know about." I described the house in detail. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, lakefront with a private dock, renovated kitchen 5 years ago, new roof 3 years back. Owen listened, asking occasional questions about heating systems, property taxes, and the condition of the septic system. "Lakefront property in good condition is always in demand," he said when I finished. "Even in this market. I think we can move quickly, especially if we position it as a pocket listing." "A what?" Emma asked. "Private sale, not listed publicly. I reach out directly to qualified buyers who I know are looking for this kind of property. More discreet, faster closing, less paperwork." "Perfect," I said. "I'll need to see the property, take measurements and photos. When would be a good time when your son and his wife aren't there?" I looked at Emma. "What's their schedule today?" "Dad has showings all afternoon. Mom's going to some yoga class at 10, then meeting friends for lunch. They should be gone from about 9:30 until at least 2, I said. Owen checked his watch. "It's 8:15 now. If you don't mind me following you home, I can do a quick assessment, be in and out before anyone returns." "Let's do it." The drive back was tense, Emma constantly checking her rearview mirror to make sure Owen was still behind us. When we pulled into the driveway, relief washed over her face when she saw Andrew's car was already gone. "Dad must have had an early showing," she said. "But Mom's still here." As if on cue, Melissa emerged from the house wearing yoga pants and carrying a water bottle, her face registering surprise at seeing us. "Emma, Richard, where were you two off to so early?" "Grandpa wanted to see the sunrise over the lake," Emma said smoothly. "We went down to the old pier." Melissa's eyes narrowed slightly, but her yoga schedule apparently outweighed her suspicion. "Well, I'm off to class. Richard, don't forget you have a doctor's appointment at 11. I've written it down on your calendar." "I remember." I said, not mentioning it wasn't her appointment I'd be keeping. She glanced at Owen, who had parked behind us but remained in his car, apparently on a phone call. "Who's that?" "Someone looking for Calvin at the marina," Emma said before I could answer. "Wrong address." Melissa seemed satisfied with this explanation. "I'll be back around 2. There's soup in the fridge if you get hungry, Richard." We waited until her car disappeared down the road before signaling to Owen. He emerged from his vehicle carrying a small camera and a laser measuring device. "That was close," he said. "She your daughter-in-law?" "The very one planning my relocation," I confirmed. Owen's assessment was thorough and efficient. He moved through the house with the practiced eye of someone who'd evaluated hundreds of properties, noting details I hadn't thought about in years. The original hardwood floors in the living room, the custom built-ins in the dining room, the way the afternoon sun hit the master bedroom. "This is a beautiful home, Mr. Miller," he said as we stood on the deck overlooking the lake. "Well-maintained, great bones, unbeatable location. I can move this quickly." "How quickly?" I asked. "I have 2 clients immediately looking for lakefront property. Henry Novak, a semi-retired businessman from Chicago, and Dr. Robert King, a surgeon from Boston looking for a vacation home. Both have cash and can close fast. He took a few more photos of the view, then turned to face me. But before we go further, I need to ask, where will you live after the sale? It was the question I'd been wrestling with myself. I'm not entirely sure yet, I admitted. I thought about an apartment, but would you consider an arrangement where you sell but maintain some rights to the property? Owen interrupted, his mind clearly working through possibilities. A life estate or something similar. What exactly does that mean? It means you sell the house but retain the right to live on the property for the rest of your life. Or we could structure it so the buyer agrees to build you a small guest cottage on the land. You get the proceeds from the sale, but also keep a place to live. The idea resonated immediately. Selling my house but staying on my land, it was a solution I hadn't considered, a way to both defeat Andrew's scheme and secure my future. Would anyone buy under those conditions? Emma asked, doubt in her voice. For the right price and the right property? Absolutely, Owen assured her. Especially buyers like Novak and King, who aren't looking to move in immediately. They might even see it as a feature, having someone familiar with the property living on site. I like it, I said. Let's explore that option. Owen nodded. I'll call both prospects today, explain the situation in general terms, see if they're interested. With your permission, I'd like to bring them by for a showing as soon as possible. Melissa and Andrew will be gone tomorrow afternoon, Emma offered. Dad has a closing in Grafton and Mom has some committee meeting. Perfect. I'll schedule both showings back to back, noon and 1 o'clock. We'll be ready, I promised. After Owen left, Emma and I sat at the kitchen table, the magnitude of what we were planning settling between us like a physical presence. Are you sure about this, Grandpa? Once you sell, there's no going back. I'm sure, I said firmly. This house hasn't felt like home since they arrived, and it won't ever again as long as I'm looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next attempt to shuffle me off. Dad's going to be furious. Your father's been making decisions for me without my consent. Now I'm making one for myself. If that makes him angry, so be it. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. What do you need me to do? Just keep playing along. Don't let them suspect anything's happening until it's done. My appointment with Dr. Matthews was at noon, not 11, as Melissa had scheduled at the clinic of their choosing. I'd canceled that appointment and made my own with the doctor who'd been treating me for 15 years, not some stranger selected to support their narrative. Dr. Matthews was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who'd seen every kind of family drama unfold around aging parents. When I explained my situation, she nodded with the resigned expression of someone who'd heard this story too many times. Let me guess, she said, leaning back in her chair. They think you can't manage on your own anymore. They've decided what's best without consulting you, and now they're moving pieces around to make it happen. Exactly. She sighed heavily. I see this at least once a month, Richard. Adult children deciding they know better, often with mixed motives. Some genuine concern, some convenience, some financial interest. I need an evaluation, I said. Something official stating I'm competent to make my own decisions. Of course. She pulled out her tablet and began making notes. Let's go through the standard assessment just to cover all bases. For the next 30 minutes, she asked me questions about dates, and presidents had me count backward from 100 by sevens, asked me to remember 3 objects, and recall them later, tested my ability to follow multi-step instructions, and evaluated my judgment with hypothetical scenarios. When she finished, she set down her tablet with a satisfied nod. Richard, you're sharp as a tack. Your cognitive function is excellent for a man half your age, let alone someone of 77. There is absolutely no medical reason you cannot continue living independently and making your own decisions. Will you put that in writing? Already drafting the letter. She typed rapidly for a few minutes, then looked up. I'll print this for you now, and I'm also sending a copy to Sarah Donovan's office as you requested. This clearly states that you are oriented to time, place, and person, have excellent judgment and decision-making capacity, and are fully capable of managing your own affairs, including financial and healthcare decisions. The relief I felt at having this document was profound, a shield against the narrative Andrew and Melissa were constructing about my supposed decline. With it in hand, I headed back home, stopping to make copies at the local print shop and email scans to both Owen and myself. When I arrived home, the house was still empty. I used the opportunity to gather a few more personal items, that I didn't want to leave behind the small wooden box Evelyn had given me on our 30th anniversary, the fishing lures my father had made, the album of photos from our early years together. I tucked these into a duffel bag and hid it in the back of my closet, ready to grab when the time came. That evening, Andrew and Melissa announced another family meeting in the living room. I sat in what used to be my chair, watching them exchange glances that telegraphed their rehearsed performance. "Dad," Andrew began with that forced cheerfulness that always preceded something unpleasant, "we've been talking about timing." "Timing for what?" I asked, though I already knew. "For your transition," Melissa said, opening a folder with practiced efficiency. "Oakwood Senior Living has a wonderful opening. They don't come up often, and we were lucky enough to get you moved to the top of their wait list. They did us a real favor." "How generous of them," I said evenly. "The move-in date is Saturday morning." Andrew continued, watching my face for a reaction. "I know it seems fast, but the staff said transitions actually go smoother when you don't drag out the anxiety. Rip off the Band-Aid, so to speak." Saturday, 2 days from now. They'd scheduled the dismantling of my life with less notice than you'd give for a dentist appointment. "Saturday is fast," I said, keeping my voice neutral, giving them nothing to work with. "We've already packed most of your essentials," Melissa said, pulling papers from the folder. "2 suitcases, 1 garment bag for your nice clothes, toiletries. The suite is fully furnished, so you won't need much. Everything else we've carefully boxed and labeled for storage in the garage." "Storage," I repeated, tasting the word. "In my own garage." "Just temporarily," Andrew said quickly. "Until we figure out what you want to keep long-term. This way nothing gets lost or damaged." Melissa slid a brochure across the coffee table toward me, glossy and professional, showing happy seniors playing cards and walking through gardens that looked nothing like the real facility probably did. "The orientation is at 10 euros Saturday morning. There's a welcome brunch afterward. Very nice, very warm. You'll make friends quickly." "Brunch," I said. "What time did you say 10 euro?" Melissa repeated, as if the schedule were already set in stone and my attendance were a foregone conclusion. Andrew pulled out another folder, this one thicker. "The suite is on the 2nd floor, close to the elevator. It has a window that looks out on the courtyard. Very peaceful. The staff-to-resident ratio exceeds state guidelines." "On weekends too?" I asked. "Exceeds across the board," Melissa said, missing or ignoring my sarcasm. I looked at the papers they'd laid out like evidence in a trial, where I was both defendant and jury. Floor plans, activity schedules, meal times, rules about visitors and noise, and what you could and couldn't keep in your room. My life reduced to bullet points in facility guidelines. "Can I see the inventory?" I asked. "The list of what you've packed for me." Melissa brightened, pleased that I was engaging with her process. She handed me several typed pages, everything itemized with the kind of detail that would make a customs inspector proud. Clothing by category, toiletries by type, personal items limited to what would fit on a single shelf. I read through it slowly, noting what they decided I needed and what they decided I didn't. Then I stood up and walked to the desk where Evelyn used to pay bills and write letters. I found a pen and a legal pad and came back. "I need you both to sign something," I said. Andrew frowned. "Sign what?" "An acknowledgement that this inventory is accurate," I said, writing at the top of the page. "Property of Richard Miller, removed from residence and placed in storage. If you're taking my things and storing them, I want a record that we all agree on what was taken and where it went." "Dad, this isn't necessary," Andrew said, but his voice had gone uncertain. "It's very necessary," I said calmly. 30 years inspecting cargo taught me that documentation prevents disputes later. You want to help me sign the paper saying you helped me exactly this way." I watched Melissa's face tighten. She knew what I was doing. I was creating a legal trail, proof that they'd removed my possessions from my home without my full consent, just my forced compliance. But she also knew that refusing to sign would look worse than signing would make their helpful concern look like something else entirely. "Fine," she said, taking the pen. "We're not hiding anything." She signed with those large looping letters that took up more space than necessary. Andrew signed below her, his signature cramped and quick, the writing of someone who wanted this moment over. I made a copy on my phone before they could change their minds, then tore off the page and handed it to them. "You keep that. I'll keep my copy." "What copy?" Melissa asked. "The photograph I just took," I said, holding up my phone. "Also sending it to myself via email just to be safe." The room went quiet except for the sound of my phone sending the email. Andrew and Melissa exchanged a look that said they were recalculating something, adjusting their strategy in real time. "Is there anything else?" I asked, my tone still perfectly reasonable, perfectly cooperative. "No," Andrew said slowly. "I think that covers it. We'll leave at 8:30 Saturday morning. I'll drive you. Melissa will follow with the second load." "Sounds like a plan," I said. And I meant it, though, not the plan they thought I was agreeing to. After they went upstairs, Emma slipped into the living room, having listened from the hallway. Her face was a mixture of worry and grudging admiration. "That was impressive," she whispered. "You got them to create evidence against themselves." "Always get a receipt," I said, an old customs inspector's rule. "What time are they leaving tomorrow?" "Dad's closing is at 11:00 in Grafton, an hour away. Mom's meeting starts at noon. They should both be gone from about 10:30 until at least 2:00. "Perfect. Owen's bringing the first potential buyer at noon, the second at 1. Make sure Brandon's not around either." She nodded. "He's got soccer practice, then he's hanging out with friends. The house will be empty." "Good. Now go to bed before they wonder why we're whispering down here." She squeezed my hand before heading upstairs, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the ticking of the grandfather clock, counting down the hours until my counterattack began. The next day dawned bright and clear, one of those perfect autumn mornings that make you grateful to be alive to see it. I kept to my usual routine: coffee, newspaper, cereal, playing the role of the complacent old man, while Andrew and Melissa bustled around preparing for their day. "Now remember, Dad," Andrew said, as he straightened his tie in the hallway mirror, "you've got that appointment with the Oakwood doctor this afternoon. Just a formality to make sure your medications are all properly documented for their pharmacy." "I remember," I lied. "I've left the address and time on the kitchen counter," Melissa added, applying lipstick without looking at me. "The taxi will pick you up at 3:00. You don't need to drive." "How considerate," I said, hiding my satisfaction at knowing they'd be waiting for evaluation results that would never come. By 10:45, both their cars were gone. Emma texted from campus confirming Brandon had left for soccer. The house was empty except for me, standing in the middle of the living room that had been mine for 35 years, preparing to transfer it to someone else's ownership. At precisely noon, Owen's car pulled into the driveway, followed by a black Mercedes. Henry Novak emerged from the luxury vehicle, a man in his early 60s with silver hair and the casual confidence of someone who'd made his own money and enjoyed spending it. He shook my hand with a firm grip, his eyes taking in the property with the assessing gaze of a professional buyer. "Beautiful spot," he said appreciatively. "You've got good bones here." The showing proceeded smoothly. Henry walked through the house, making occasional comments about changes he might make, opening up the kitchen to the dining room, updating the master bath, adding a boat lift at the dock. But it was on the deck facing the lake where he stopped and went quiet, staring out at the water with an expression I recognized from my own first view of this property decades ago. "The cottage," Owen prompted after a respectful silence. "As we discussed, Mr. Miller would retain rights to build and occupy a small residence on the property." Henry nodded slowly. "I've done stranger deals. Where would you want it?" I walked to the back corner of the property, about 50 feet from the main house, with a clear view of the lake, but enough distance for privacy. "Here, small 2 bedrooms. Nothing fancy. Just enough space for me and occasional visitors." Henry studied the location, visualizing. "Works for me. I'd be in Chicago half the time anyway. When I'm here, I'd like someone familiar with the property, keeping an eye on things." Before he left, Henry shook my hand again. "I'll have an offer to Owen by 5 today. Whatever happens, I appreciate you considering me for this place. It's special." An hour later, Dr. Robert King arrived for his showing. Where Henry had been businesslike and direct, Robert was thoughtful and methodical, examining every aspect of the house with a surgeon's attention to detail. He asked about the foundation, the wiring, the insulation, making notes in a small leather-bound notebook. Like Henry, Robert seemed most moved by the view from the deck, though he expressed it differently. "I've spent 40 years in operating rooms making life-and-death decisions," he said quietly. "I need somewhere to decompress, somewhere with perspective." When I showed him the spot where I'd want my cottage, he pulled out a small tape measure and began calculating dimensions, already designing the space in his mind. "Southern exposure," he noted. "Good. Plenty of natural light. We could position it to maximize both privacy and views. By 4 o'clock, both showings were complete, and Owen sat with me at the kitchen table, his tablet displaying emails from both potential buyers. They're both interested, he confirmed, both comfortable with the cottage arrangement. Henry's offering $350,000 cash, no contingencies, close in 10 days. Robert's at $340,000 conventional financing, 21-day close, but no inspection contingency. Which do you recommend, I asked. Honestly, Henry's offer is cleaner and faster. Cash with no contingencies means less that can go wrong. With your timeline, that's significant. Then let's accept Henry's offer, I said, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and triumph. How soon can we open escrow? I can have the paperwork ready for signatures tomorrow morning. We'll open escrow Monday, close the following Friday. 10 days total. Will that be fast enough? Andrew and Melissa plan to move me to Oakwood on Saturday. Owen considered this. We won't have closed by then, but we'll have a binding purchase agreement in place. Once you sign tomorrow, Henry puts up earnest money that makes the deal official. That should be enough to stop them in their tracks when you tell them. I'm not telling them until the last possible moment, I said. The element of surprise is too valuable. Owen nodded approvingly. Smart. Where and when do you want to sign tomorrow? Can you come here at 8:00 a.m.? They won't leave for Oakwood until 8:30. Cutting it close, he observed. But I like your style, Mr. Miller. I'll be here at 8:00 sharp. That night, I barely slept, my mind racing with plans and contingencies. What if Andrew refused to take me to Oakwood once he learned about the sale? What if Melissa tried to claim I wasn't competent? What if they contested the sale? I had answers for each scenario, but the uncertainty still gnawed at me. Emma checked in via text around midnight. Everything set for tomorrow. Yes, I replied. Owen comes at 8. Don't react when I tell them at Oakwood. I won't. But Grandpa, I'm proud of you. Those 4 words settled something in my chest, a weight lifting that I hadn't realized was there. Whatever happened tomorrow, I'd acted to protect my dignity and autonomy. I'd refused to be a passenger in my own life, and my granddaughter was proud of me for it. Morning arrived too quickly, and not soon enough. I dressed carefully in the clothes I'd set aside, not my best, which would arouse suspicion, but not my worst either. I wanted to look like a man who knew exactly what he was doing when the moment came to reveal my plan. Andrew and Melissa were busy with their own preparations, packing the car with the suitcases they'd prepared for my new home. Brandon slouched at the kitchen table, absorbed in his phone, clearly unhappy about being dragged along. Emma moved quietly around the edges, catching my eye occasionally with small nods of encouragement. At precisely 8:00, Owen's car pulled into the driveway. I slipped outside while Andrew was upstairs retrieving something, meeting Owen halfway to the house. Right on time, I said, leading him quickly to the side porch where we wouldn't be immediately visible from inside. He handed me a folder containing the purchase agreement. Everything's ready. Standard sale contract with the special provision for your cottage as we discussed. 3 pages need your signature. I signed quickly, but carefully reading each section to make sure it matched what we'd agreed upon. Just as I finished the last signature, the front door opened and Andrew emerged carrying a small duffel bag. Dad, who's this? His voice carried confusion mixed with the first hint of suspicion. Andrew, this is Owen Morrison. He's a real estate broker. Andrew's eyes narrowed, shifting from Owen to the papers in my hand. What's going on? I'll explain everything at Oakwood, I said calmly. We should get going if we're going to make that 10:00 orientation. For a moment, I thought he might refuse, might demand answers right then and there. But the programming of his own schedule won out. They'd planned this day meticulously, and deviating now would throw everything off. Fine, he said tightly, but I expect a full explanation. Owen took the signed papers, shook my hand with a wink only I could see, and headed back to his car. I'll file these immediately, he said. Congratulations on your sale, Mr. Miller. The drive to Oakwood was silent and tense. Andrew gripping the steering wheel so tightly, his knuckles showed white, occasionally glancing at me in the rearview mirror, as if I might disappear if he didn't keep checking. Melissa followed in her car with Emma and Brandon. By the time we pulled into the circular drive of Oakwood Senior Living, the silence in the car felt like a physical presence. The facility looked exactly as I expected, institutional care disguised as luxury living. Beige brick, exterior white trim, large windows reflecting the morning sun, a covered entrance where someone in scrubs was helping an elderly woman out of a wheelchair van. Here we are, Andrew said with manufactured enthusiasm. Nice place, right? It's a place, I said neutrally. Inside the lobby did everything it could to not look like what it was. Floral arrangements on side tables, comfortable chairs arranged in conversational groupings that nobody was using a piano in the corner that probably got played once a month during activities hour. And that smell, the one all these places have a mixture of industrial cleaner and cafeteria food, and something else underneath that you don't want to think about too hard. A woman in professional attire approached us with a clipboard and a smile that had been practiced in a mirror. Mr. Miller, I'm Karen, the admissions coordinator. Welcome to Oakwood. We're so happy to have you joining our community. Community. As if being assigned to live somewhere made you part of something voluntary and warm. Thank you, I said, shaking her hand with the firmness that says, I'm still here, still present, still a person who deserves eye contact. Let's get you checked in, and then Dana will do your initial assessment. Just standard questions, nothing to worry about. Then we'll show you to your suite, and you can get settled before the welcome brunch at 10 Haru. Andrew hovered at my elbow like he was afraid I might bolt. Melissa came in with Emma and Brandon trailing behind all of them, carrying pieces of my dismantled life in their arms. A younger woman in navy scrubs appeared from a side hallway holding a tablet and wearing a name badge that said Dana RN. She had kind eyes, the sort that had seen plenty of families in various stages of this same dynamic and had learned not to judge too quickly. Mr. Miller, I'm Dana. I'll be doing your wellness assessment. It's just a conversation, really. Some questions about how you're feeling, how you're managing daily activities. Standard stuff we do with all new residents. Privately, if that's okay, she added, glancing at the cluster of family members. Melissa stepped forward. I should probably stay in case he doesn't remember something or gets confused. Dana's smile stayed in place, but her voice took on a professional firmness. Actually, we find that people answer more openly when they don't feel observed. It's facility policy for initial assessments. You're welcome to wait right here in the lobby. I caught Emma's eye and saw relief there. She knew what I knew. This was my first chance to tell someone official that I wasn't here entirely of my own free will. Dana led me to a small office off the main hallway, comfortable but clinical, with a desk and 2 chairs and a poster about fall prevention on the wall. She closed the door and sat down across from me, tablet ready, but her attention fully present. Okay, Mr. Miller, I'm going to ask you some questions. There are no wrong answers. I just need to get a sense of where you are cognitively and physically. First, can you tell me today's date? Saturday, November 18th, 2023. I said clearly. Who's the current president? I told her. Can you draw me a clock showing 10:11? She handed me paper and a pen. I drew a circle, marked the numbers, drew the hands pointing to the correct positions. Not perfect, but accurate. Excellent, she said, making notes. Do you take any medications? I listed them, gave her the dosages from memory, explained what each one was for. Do you prepare your own meals? I did until 2 weeks ago when my family moved into my house. I said, deciding to be direct. Her pen paused. Tell me about that. My son and his wife arrived with 6 suitcases and announced they were staying because their house needed work. They moved me out of my bedroom into a guest room. They've been making changes to my home without asking permission. And now they've moved me here to this facility also without really asking. Dana set down her tablet. Mr. Miller, I need to ask you something important. Is anyone pressuring you to move to this facility? People have ideas about what's best for me, I said carefully. But ideas aren't orders. I'm here because my son made a reservation and paid a deposit and drove me here this morning. I'm cooperating because I'm 77 and I know how to pick my battles, but no, this wasn't my choice. She nodded slowly. Are you capable of making your own decisions about where you live? I believe I am, I said. I managed that house for 35 years. I managed a career as a customs inspector for 3 decades. I can still cook, clean, handle my medications, drive a car, and remember what day it is. What I can't do is stop my son from making decisions about my life without consulting me. Dana made several notes, her expression thoughtful. Mr. Miller, based on this assessment, you are oriented to time, place, and person. You demonstrate clear understanding of your situation. Your memory and judgment appear intact. I'm going to note in your file that you are independent in activities of daily living and show no signs of cognitive impairment that would prevent you from making your own decisions about housing. Thank you, I said quietly. That doesn't mean we can't provide services if you want them, she continued. But it does mean that you're here as a voluntary resident, not as someone who requires supervised care. Do you understand the difference? I do, I said, and I appreciate you making that distinction. She walked me back to the lobby where my family was waiting with expressions that ranged from anxious to impatient. Everything went very well, Dana told them. Mr. Miller is oriented and independent. I'll send my notes to his primary care physician and to administration. Melissa's smile looked strained. That's wonderful. Now let's get you settled in your suite. After the tour of a suite that looked like a hotel room pretending to be a home, after the unpacking of my 2 suitcases into spaces designed for temporary residents, rather than people with histories after the welcome brunch with weak coffee and small talk with strangers who'd all arrived here through their own versions of family pressure or declining health, I finally got a moment alone with my entire family. We gathered in the small sitting area of my suite, Andrew and Melissa perched awkwardly on the edge of the twin bed, Emma leaning against the wall. Brandon slumped in the only armchair. The moment had come. I sold the house, I said simply. The words hung in the air like a bell that had been rung and couldn't be unrung. Melissa's face went blank, processing delayed by disbelief. Andrew's mouth opened and closed once before he found words. I'm sorry, he said. What? I opened the folder I'd been holding and pulled out the first document. The papers were filed this morning. Funds will be wired to escrow. Official closing is Friday, but the deal is binding now. I handed him Owen's confirmation email, the one with the recording number and the timestamp. Andrew stared at it like it was written in a language he didn't speak. You can't just sell a house. You're in assisted living. I need my own consent, which I gave, I said, pulling out Dana's assessment. Cognitively sound, independent, in all activities of daily living, oriented to time, place, and person, capable of making complex decisions. Melissa found her voice sharp and rising. When did you do this? How did you? While you were rearranging my house and scheduling my medical appointments without asking, I said calmly. While you were planning my life like I was a piece of furniture that needed relocating. I pulled out the inventory list, the one they'd both signed. 30 days for current occupants to vacate. Your signatures are right here acknowledging you removed my property and placed it in storage. Very helpful documentation, actually. Andrew's face had gone through confusion and was landing on anger. Dad, you can't just... I can. I said, my voice still level but with steel underneath. Owner of record me. No liens, no guardianship, no power of attorney because I refused to sign it. Just a legal property owner executing a legal sale of his legal property. Where are we supposed to go? Melissa demanded, her voice cracking slightly. You have salaries, I said. You have jobs, and you have 30 days, which is more notice than you gave me when you showed up with 6 suitcases. Andrew stepped closer, his face flushed with anger, and something else, fear maybe, or the dawning realization that he'd badly underestimated his old man. Who bought it? He asked, his voice tight with barely controlled emotion. Henry Novak, businessman from Chicago looking for a lakefront property. Cash buyer, no contingencies. We close next Friday. And where will you live? Melissa asked, her tone accusatory, as if she'd caught me in a trap. That's the interesting part, I said, pulling out the last document, the addendum to the purchase agreement. Henry's building me a cottage on the property. 2 bedrooms, kitchen, bath, private entrance. I'll have a life lease, which means I can stay there as long as I choose. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by Emma's poorly disguised cough that might have been covering a laugh. You're building a house, Melissa said finally, her voice hollow with disbelief. On the property, while we find somewhere else to live. Exactly, I said. I'll be at Lakeside Tower for 90 days while construction happens. Henry's funding that too. Then I move into my cottage and you visit when you're invited, which will depend entirely on how you conduct yourselves over the next month. This can't be legal, Andrew said, but I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. It's entirely legal, I assured him. Owner sold property he solely owned while demonstrably competent. Standard transaction. The only unusual element is the life lease arrangement, and that's not unusual enough to invalidate anything. Andrew turned away, his hands balled into fists at his sides, visibly struggling to control his breathing. When he turned back, his face was doing something complicated, moving through anger towards something that might have been the beginning of understanding. You did this because we moved you here, he said, his voice quieter now. I did this because you forgot I was a person, I said quietly. You forgot I had a name on a deed. You forgot I spent 30 years inspecting cargo for contraband, which means I know how to spot people trying to smuggle things past me. And you forgot that being old doesn't mean being helpless. We were trying to keep you safe, he said, his voice smaller now. You were trying to take my house, I corrected. Safety was the story you told yourselves to feel better about it. Melissa's parents need a place to live and my house was convenient. That's the truth. The rest was just packaging. Melissa stood abruptly. We're leaving, she announced, not looking at me. Brandon. Emma, let's go. Brandon, who had been watching this entire exchange with wide eyes and the first real interest I'd seen him show in anything family-related, didn't move. Where are we going to live? He asked, looking at his father. We'll figure it out. Andrew said, his voice tight with suppressed emotion. We have 30 days. Emma hadn't moved either. She looked at me, then at her parents, clearly torn between loyalty and the justice she'd helped create. Emma now, Melissa snapped. I'll be right there. Emma said, her voice steady. I want to say goodbye to Grandpa. Melissa opened her mouth to protest, then thought better of it. She guided Brandon toward the door, Andrew following behind his shoulders, slumped in defeat. When they were gone, Emma turned to me with a mixture of awe and concern. That was intense. It was necessary, I said. They needed to understand that actions have consequences. What now? She asked. Now I move forward. I sign the final papers on Friday, move to Lakeside Tower, while Henry builds my cottage, and start the next chapter on my terms, not theirs. She hugged me, then a fierce embrace that said more than words could. I'm sorry it came to this, she whispered. I'm not, I said honestly. Sometimes things need to break before they can heal properly. Your dad and I will find our way back to each other eventually, but it needed to be on equal footing. Not with him treating me like a child who can't make his own decisions. Will you be okay here until Friday? I can come visit every day. I'll be fine. Dana and I have an understanding. I'm here voluntarily and I can leave anytime I choose. She nodded, relief washing over her face. They're waiting, I should go. Go. And Emma, thank you for telling me the truth when no one else would. After she left, I sat alone in the institutional armchair of my temporary room, feeling a strange mixture of triumph and sorrow. I hadn't wanted it to come to this. I hadn't wanted to sell the house where Evelyn and I had built our life together. But Andrew and Melissa had forced my hand, had made it impossible for me to stay without surrendering my autonomy. I pulled out my phone and texted Calvin. It's done. Papers signed this morning. Told them at Oakwood. His response came back almost immediately. How'd they take it? About as well as you'd expect, I replied. Shock, anger, disbelief. But it's done now. No going back. Good. You stood your ground. Proud of you. I set down the phone and looked around at the sterile, impersonal room that would be mine for exactly 6 more days. Not home. Never home. Just a way station on the journey to what came next. And what came next would be on my terms, not anyone else's. The customs inspector had made his final inspection and found the contraband. The smugglers had been caught. And now it was time to reclaim what was rightfully mine, not just property, but dignity, autonomy, and the right to make my own decisions for as long as I was capable of making them. The counterattack had succeeded. But the war for respect wasn't over yet. The 6 days I spent at Oakwood were a strange limbo, not quite prisoner, not quite guest. My voluntary resident status, thanks to Dana's honest assessment, gave me privileges others didn't have. I could come and go as I pleased, decline scheduled activities, and receive visitors without supervision. The staff treated me differently once word spread that I was the old man who had outmaneuvered his family. On day 3, I received an unexpected visitor. Frank Morrison appeared in the doorway of my room, leaning on a cane but standing straight, his eyes bright with mischief. Thought I'd welcome you to the neighborhood, he said, extending his hand. Word travels fast around here. Frank, I said, genuinely pleased. Come in. What brings you by? Curiosity. It's not every day someone beats the system from the inside. He settled into the armchair, placing his cane carefully against the side. Calvin told me what you did. Selling the house out from under them while they were busy packing your bags, pure genius. Not genius, I said, sitting on the edge of the bed. Just a customs inspector doing what he's trained to do. Frank laughed a deep, satisfying sound. And how did the smugglers take it when they were caught? About as well as you'd expect. Anger, disbelief, the usual stages of being outmaneuvered. And now, silence. Haven't heard from Andrew or Melissa since Saturday. Emma checks in daily, says they're frantically apartment hunting. Turns out the housing market isn't friendly to sudden relocations. Any regrets? Frank asked, his expression serious. I considered the question honestly. About asserting my independence, no. About how it had to happen. Yes. I didn't want it to come to this, but they gave me no choice. Frank nodded slowly. That's the thing about children. They forget we were adults before they were born. That we managed complicated lives, made difficult decisions, solved problems. They see gray hair and assume the brain underneath has gone soft. Exactly. We talked for nearly an hour, swapping stories of careers long finished, but not forgotten, of marriages that had shaped us, of children who sometimes understood us and sometimes didn't. It was the most normal conversation I'd had in weeks. No agenda, no manipulation, just two men of similar age and experience speaking honestly. As Frank was leaving, he paused at the door. You know, Richard, what you did wasn't just for you. It was for all of us. Every time one of us stands up against being shuffled off and silenced, it helps the next person. His words stayed with me long after he left, a reminder that dignity isn't just personal, it's a battle fought on behalf of everyone who comes after. On Friday morning, Owen picked me up for the closing. It was a strange feeling signing the papers that officially transferred ownership of the house I'd lived in for 35 years. But as I watched Henry sign his portion and the title company representative notarize the documents, I felt a weight lifting. This wasn't an ending, it was a transformation. Congratulations, Henry said, shaking my hand when it was done. The property is officially mine and your cottage is officially in process. The architect's coming Monday to finalize the plans. We're fast-tracking construction, should be done in 60 days, weather permitting. I appreciate that, I said sincerely. In the meantime, you're all set at Lakeside Tower. The lease is paid for 90 days just to give us a buffer in case of construction delays. It's a nice place, more independent living than assisted. I think you'll like it better than this facility. Almost anywhere would be better than this facility, I said dryly. Owen handed me an envelope. Your proceeds from the sale. The bank will wire the funds on Monday, but this has all the information you'll need. The life lease agreement is also in there, officially recorded with the county. No one can challenge your right to occupy the cottage once it's built. I tucked the envelope carefully into my jacket pocket, the tangible proof of my freedom. Thank you both, for everything. That afternoon, I was packing the few belongings I'd brought to Oakwood when a knock came at my door. I opened it to find Dana, the nurse who'd done my initial assessment, holding a clipboard. Mr. Miller, she said with a warm smile, I hear congratulations are in order. You're being discharged. That's right. Moving to Lakeside Tower while my cottage is being built. Good for you. She handed me a form. Just need your signature on the voluntary discharge paperwork. And between you and me, I'm glad you found a better solution. You never belonged here. I signed with a flourish. Any chance you could help me arrange transportation? I was planning to call a taxi. No need. Your family's here to pick you up. My family. A knot formed in my stomach. Andrew and Melissa. Know your granddaughter. Emma. I believe she's waiting in the lobby. Relief washed over me. Thank you, Dana, for everything. Just doing my job, Mr. Miller. Take care of yourself. I found Emma sitting nervously in the lobby, jumping to her feet when she saw me approaching with my suitcase. Grandpa. She hurried over, embracing me awkwardly around my luggage. I thought I'd save you the taxi fare. That's thoughtful, I said, studying her face. How are things at home? Her expression clouded slightly. Tense. Mom and Dad found an apartment, but it's small and expensive. They're not happy. I imagine not. Dad wants to talk to you, she said as we walked to her car. He's been trying to work up the courage to call. Has he now? I kept my tone neutral, neither encouraging nor discouraging. He's angry, but also, I think he's starting to understand. A little anyway. We drove in comfortable silence for a while, the familiar landscapes of Cedar Point giving way to the more developed areas around Lakeside Tower. The building itself was pleasant, modern, but not sterile, with large windows and balconies overlooking the smaller Crystal Lake. Nothing like the institutional feel of Oakwood. This is nice, Emma said as we pulled into the parking lot. More like a regular apartment building. That's what I thought. I agreed. No nurse's station, no scheduled activities unless you want them. Just independent living with some optional services. The apartment Henry had arranged was on the 4th floor with a small balcony facing the water. One bedroom, a decent-sized living room, a kitchenette, and a bathroom with grab bars that didn't make the place look like a hospital. My few belongings from Oakwood barely made a dent in the space. It's a bit empty, I admitted as we stood in the center of the living room. I'll need to get some furniture. I have an idea about that, Emma said hesitantly, but I'm not sure how you'll feel about it. Go on. Some of your things from the house, your favorite chair, your books the side table Grandma loved, they're still in the garage. Dad hasn't moved them. I could bring them here if you want. I considered this. Those pieces were mine, had always been mine. Having them wouldn't just provide comfort, it would be another small victory in reclaiming what belonged to me. I'd like that, I said finally, but only if it doesn't cause more problems between you and your parents. Let me handle that, she said with surprising firmness. You've taught me that sometimes you have to stand up for what's right, even to family, especially to family. The next morning, a knock on my door revealed a surprise visitor. Andrew stood in the hallway, his posture stiff, his expression a careful blank. He held a cardboard box in his hands. Dad, he said formally, may I come in? I stepped aside silently, allowing him to enter. He placed the box on the counter that separated the kitchenette from the living room, then stood awkwardly looking around at the sparse apartment. Emma said you were settling in, he said finally. I brought some things you might want. Your coffee mug, some books, the photo of you and Mom from the mantel. Thank you, I said, neither warm nor cold. How's the apartment hunt going? He winced slightly. We found a place. 2-bedroom on Maple Street. It's adequate. And Melissa's parents? Staying in their condo for now. The market's not great for selling at the moment. An awkward silence fell between us, thick with unspoken accusations and explanations. Finally, Andrew took a deep breath. I didn't know about the guardianship petition, he blurted out. Melissa and her parents filed it without telling me. When I found out, I made her withdraw it immediately. This was unexpected. The petition, to declare you incompetent, after you told us about selling the house. She was desperate, thought if she could get emergency temporary guardianship, she could void the sale. I would never have agreed to that. Never. I studied his face, looking for deception and finding none. I believe you. He seemed surprised by this. You do. You've made some poor choices lately, Andrew, but I know you wouldn't go that far. He dropped his gaze to the floor, his shoulders slumping slightly. I messed up, Dad. I thought I was helping. I really did. I saw you alone in that big house and I worried, but I handled it all wrong. Yes, you did. I agreed, not softening the blow. You decided what was best for me without asking what I wanted. You treated me like a problem to solve instead of a person to respect. I know that now, he said quietly, and I'm sorry, truly sorry. Sorry is a start, I said, but it's going to take more than that to rebuild what's been broken. He nodded, accepting this. The cottage construction starts Monday. Henry's architect contacted me about access to the property. I told them they have my full cooperation. That's something, I acknowledged. Andrew glanced around the apartment again. You need furniture, things from the house. I can bring whatever you want. Emma's already offered, I said, but if you want to help her, that would be appreciated. He nodded again, clearly uncertain about what else to say or do. As he turned to leave, I called after him. Andrew. He paused at the door, looking back with a mixture of hope and wariness. Why didn't you fight the sale legally, I mean? You could have tried to challenge my competency, get an injunction. A complicated expression crossed his face. Because you outplayed me fair and square. Because you proved beyond any doubt that you're still sharp as a tack. And because, he hesitated, because deep down I knew you were right. About everything. After he left, I opened the box he'd brought. On top was the photograph of Evelyn and me, the one Melissa had removed from the mantel. I placed it carefully on the windowsill where the light could catch it. Below were several books, my favorite coffee mug, and a folded piece of paper I didn't recognize. I opened it to find a letter handwritten in careful script. Dad, I know words are cheap, and you've had enough empty promises to last a lifetime. So I won't make any. I'll just say this, I'm listening now. Really listening. And I'm learning. What you did shocked me, angered me, but it also taught me something important. You're still the man who taught me to fish, to change a tire, to look people in the eye. You're still capable, still intelligent, still the father I've respected all my life. I forgot that for a while. Let myself believe I knew better. I was wrong. I don't expect forgiveness. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I hope with time we can find a new way forward. Your son, Andrew. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the box. It wasn't an ending or a resolution. It was a beginning, tentative, uncertain, but a beginning nonetheless. The next day, Emma and Andrew arrived with a small moving truck containing my favorite chair, the side table Evelyn had loved, my desk, several lamps and boxes of books and personal items. We spent the afternoon arranging the furniture, transforming the sterile apartment into something that felt like a home, if not the home I'd known. The architect called, Andrew said as we placed the last of the books on a hastily assembled shelf. They're breaking ground on Monday. Foundation should be poured by Wednesday if the weather holds. That's fast, I remarked. Henry's motivated. Says he wants you in before winter really hits. He hesitated. I've been helping them, actually. Clearing the site, marking utilities. Makes me feel like I'm doing something right for once. I nodded, acknowledging this effort without fully endorsing it. The wounds were still too fresh for complete reconciliation, but it was a step in the right direction. Emma, watching this exchange, smiled cautiously. Mom's been asking about you, she offered, in her own way. Which means what exactly, I asked. She wanted to know if you needed anything. She didn't phrase it well, something about proper nutrition for someone his age, but I think she's trying. Small steps. I said, neither encouraging nor discouraging further contact. Construction on the cottage proceeded with surprising speed. Henry had hired a crew that specialized in small, efficient builds, and the foundation was indeed poured that first week. By the second week, the framing was up, giving shape to what would be my new home. I visited the site regularly, watching as my future took physical form on the land I'd loved for decades. It was during one of these visits, 3 weeks into construction, that I encountered Melissa for the first time since the confrontation at Oakwood. I was standing with the site foreman discussing the placement of electrical outlets when her car pulled into the driveway. She sat there for a long moment before finally emerging, her posture stiff, her face carefully composed. Richard, she said formally, approaching with measured steps. I was dropping something off for Andrew. I didn't expect to see you here. I come by most days, I said, equally formal, to check on progress. She glanced at the partially constructed cottage, something unreadable crossing her face. It's coming along nicely. Yes, it is. The foreman, sensing tension, excused himself, leaving us standing awkwardly at the edge of the construction site. Melissa seemed to be struggling with what to say next. Andrew tells me you're settled at Lakeside Tower, she finally managed. I am. It's comfortable enough for now. She nodded, her eyes darting everywhere but at me. That's good. I waited, saying nothing, letting the silence do its work. After 30 years in customs, I knew that silence was often the most effective interrogation technique. People rush to fill it, revealing more than they intend. I want you to know, she said, finally, the words coming in a rush, that I never meant for things to go this far. I was trying to help. My parents needed a place, and this house was so big for just one person, and it seemed like a perfect solution. A perfect solution that involved moving me to Oakwood without my consent, I observed. She flinched slightly. We thought it would be better for everyone. Everyone except me. That's not... She stopped, reconsidered. Yes, I suppose that's right. We didn't really consider what you wanted. We just assumed we knew better. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was an admission. And sometimes that's where healing has to start. The guardianship petition, I said. That was crossing a line. Her face flushed with shame. I know. It was wrong. I was desperate and angry, and it was inexcusable. Andrew was furious when he found out, as he should have been. She looked at me directly for the first time. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Richard. I don't expect that, but I am sorry, for what it's worth. I nodded, acknowledging her words without offering absolution. It's worth something. Not everything, but something. As she turned to leave, I called after her, much as I had with Andrew weeks earlier. Melissa. She paused, looking back cautiously. Tell your parents I hope they find a suitable place. one that doesn't involve displacing someone else. Her mouth tightened, but she nodded once before walking back to her car. It wasn't reconciliation, not by a long shot, but it was acknowledgement, and sometimes that's all you can hope for in the aftermath of betrayal. The cottage was completed in early January ahead of schedule despite a week of heavy snow that had delayed roofing. It was everything I'd hoped for, compact, but not cramped, efficient, but not institutional. 2 bedrooms as I'd specified, one for me and one for visitors. A small but functional kitchen with counters at the right height for comfortable cooking. A bathroom with grab bars that looked like design elements rather than medical equipment. And most importantly, a porch facing the lake with room for 2 chairs and a small table between them. Henry had been true to his word in every detail, down to the quality of the fixtures and the finish on the hardwood floors. He'd even added unexpected touches, built-in bookshelves in the living room, a fireplace with a Riverstone surround ceiling fans throughout to help with summer heat. The day I moved in, a small group gathered to help Emma and Brandon Andrew, though not Melissa Calvin and his nephew Owen, even Dana from Oakwood, who'd become something of a friend. Henry himself came bringing a bottle of good whiskey and 2 crystal glasses. "Housewarming," he said, setting them on the counter. "For when everyone leaves and you can finally enjoy your new home in peace." "I appreciate that," I said sincerely, "and everything else you've done to make this happen." Henry waved this off. "I got a great property at a fair price. The cottage was just part of the deal. Still, you could have cut corners, delayed construction. You didn't." "I believe in honoring agreements," he said simply. "My word means something." While the others arranged furniture and unpacked boxes, Henry and I walked down to the lake, now frozen at the edges, with a thin skin of ice extending several feet from shore. "The main house is coming along," he said, gesturing to where workers were installing new windows in what used to be my home. "Should be finished with renovations by spring." "Will you be moving in then?" I asked. "Part-time. I'll still need to be in Chicago for business at least half the month. That's why I'm glad you'll be here. Property needs someone who knows its rhythms, its quirks." "Happy to be of service," I said, only half joking. "It's not a service, it's a partnership," Henry corrected. "You know this land, this lake better than I ever will. I respect that knowledge." We stood in companionable silence, watching a pair of eagles circle high above the far shore, their wingspans impressive even at a distance. "Your son's been helping with the renovations," Henry said eventually. "Stops by several times a week to check on things, offer suggestions." "Has he?" This was news to me. "He knows the house inside and out. Been very useful, actually. And it's clear he cares about the place despite everything." I nodded, unsure how to feel about this information. "He grew up here. It's in his blood, I suppose. He talks about you, you know. About lessons you taught him, skills you passed down. Good lessons, I hope. The best kind. How to build things that last. How to respect what came before you." Henry glanced at me. "You raised a good man, Richard. A flawed one who made mistakes, but a good one nonetheless." "I'd like to think so," I said quietly. Back at the cottage, the work of settling in continued throughout the afternoon. By evening, everyone had left except Emma, who insisted on staying to help arrange the kitchen exactly as I wanted it. "Grandpa," she said as we placed the last of the dishes in cupboards, "I have something to tell you." "That sounds serious." "I applied to law school, elder law specialization." "Did you now?" I couldn't keep the pride from my voice. "And what prompted this decision?" She smiled, a flash of her grandmother's determination in her expression. "Let's just say recent events were educational. I've seen firsthand how older adults can be marginalized, how their autonomy can be threatened. I want to help prevent that." "You'd be good at it," I said sincerely. "You've got a strong sense of justice." "I learned from the best." She hesitated. "There's more. I've been talking with Dad about setting up a regular lunch, just you and him, neutral ground. He wants to try to rebuild things." "And what do you think I should do?" I asked, curious about her perspective. "I think..." She chose her words carefully. "I think family is complicated. I think people make terrible mistakes, especially when they think they're doing the right thing. And I think second chances are valuable, but they have to be earned, not given." Wise words for someone so young. "I had a good teacher," she said simply. After she left, I sat alone on my new porch in a chair I'd brought from the main house, wrapped in a blanket against the January chill. The lake was dark now, the ice near the shore reflecting moonlight like shattered glass. In the distance, lights glowed in the windows of what used to be my home, where Henry's contractors were finishing up for the day. I poured a measure of Henry's whiskey into one of the crystal glasses and raised it in a silent toast. To Evelyn, who would have approved of this solution. To Emma, who had chosen conscience over comfort. To Andrew, who was trying in his imperfect way to make amends. Even to Melissa, who had at least acknowledged her mistakes, if not fully atoned for them. And to myself for standing my ground, for refusing to be a passenger in my own life, for reclaiming the dignity they had tried to take from me. The game had started when they arrived with 6 suitcases and assumptions about what I could and couldn't manage. It had continued through their small usurpations, moving furniture, replacing photos, scheduling appointments I never requested. It had escalated with their plans to warehouse me at Oakwood while they took my home for their own purposes. But I had changed the rules of engagement. I had refused to play by their expectations. I had used their own tactics, planning documentation, strategic timing to outmaneuver them at their own game. Not for revenge, for correction. And now sitting on the porch of a cottage that existed because I had refused to surrender, watching the moonlight on a lake that had witnessed 35 years of my life, I felt something settle into place. Not forgiveness, not yet. But perhaps the beginnings of understanding. The first tentative steps toward reconciliation. Family, as Emma had said, is complicated. Sometimes the people who should protect you are the ones who threaten your autonomy. Sometimes the ones who love you are the ones who try to control you. And sometimes the only way to restore balance is to demonstrate beyond any doubt that you are still capable of standing on your own. I sipped the whiskey, letting its warmth spread through my chest. The cottage around me, small but perfect, was proof of my victory. But it was also a reminder of what had been lost: the easy trust between father and son, the assumption of good intentions, the belief that family would always put your interests first. Perhaps some of that could be rebuilt in time. Perhaps some of it was gone forever. Only the future would tell. For now, it was enough to sit in a chair I had chosen on a porch I had designed, looking out at a view that had been my companion for decades. It was enough to know that I had stood up for my own dignity and won. The rest would come in its own time, like the spring that would eventually thaw the frozen lake. Some relationships, like some seasons, need the cold clarity of winter before they can experience renewal. And Richard Miller, 77 years old, former customs inspector, current cottage dweller, was prepared to wait for as long as it took. Because if 30 years of inspecting cargo had taught me anything, it was that patience is more than a virtue, it's a strategy. And I had always been good at strategy.